What we can do now is we can create some of our work in progress or wine in progress, as we called it in this exercise. So we are going to add a new stock item. Essentially, what we're wanting to create here is a Merlot liter of wine. Okay, we can switch the international spelling rather than American there. And the SKU that we will use is essentially wine, and we can put in there Merlot, and we can put in 2018 vintage. So I might actually specify as well wine in progress. So now that's a clearly specified SKU for a middle stage of the process. We've got all our raw items, the grapes and so on, and what we'll be doing is we'll be converting that into wine that is then maturing. So we've got that there. It is a stock item. It is a wine in progress. The costing method is fine for FIFO, and what we will do is we will essentially specify liter. Now, the inventory account, if we specify the work in progress account here in 0, traditional name, then what will happen is that as we start to make wine and we transfer from raw materials into this wine in progress, we will see that journal automatically shift that value across our balance sheet from the raw materials to the work in progress. Now, the step that's really important here to start to understand is how the bill of materials functionality works in DIA. And if we tick bill of materials, what we get is we get an additional menu down here to specify what components go into this product. Now, the components that I've laid out here are relatively straightforward. We will need to enter the grapes, and if we look at the grapes, we've got the Merlot grapes. So if we are creating the Merlot liter of wine, we can put in the Merlot grapes, a kilogram. We can come back to the quantity in a second. And then what essentially we will need is possibly some of the chemicals in that process. Now, we'll come back to this in a second. What's really important to understand is that when we do an assembly, it will take out the quantities that we've specified from those stock items and give us a liter of wine or several liters of wine, and therefore take a certain quantity of the grapes, which is measured in kilograms, which is quite important to remember, and ultimately take a certain portion of the chemicals. So then let's put in some of the quantities. Now, I'm not a winemaker. These quantities are completely made up, but they'll highlight the principle that we're essentially addressing here, is that to produce 1 liter of wine, I'm going to assume that we need 2 kilograms of grapes. So when I run this assembly to produce 1 liter of wine, that is my unit of measure, 1 liter of wine, I will essentially use 2 kilograms of grapes. Again, I'm going to make up a quantity for the chemicals. Let's say that we use 1 gram or 1,000th of a kilogram. So 0.001 is essentially 1,000th, and that essentially goes in there. You've got to be very careful when you're building your recipes and make sure that when you do an assembly, what you expect to happen to your stock does actually happen. Now, you can fill in wastage quantities if those are well known, and again, it's important to emphasize that you can adjust the bill of materials when doing a manufacture. So let's leave those in there for now. The cost will be updated as we actually start purchasing in these products, and the cost filters through into the system. So at the moment, the system doesn't have any costs put in. Then, to demonstrate the next part where we can use labor and overheads. What we can do with overheads is we can essentially assign a cost to be applied when an assembly is done. So when we're essentially producing this liter of wine, we will use up stock items, but we can also specify a default labor or overhead charge. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to add one of these services that we had. And let's say that for every liter of wine, we need to have that inspected essentially when we do that manufacturing process. So if I put an inspection service and I say we require a quantity of 1, it's a service, what we will do is for each liter that is produced, it'll use 1 of these inspection services. And what we're going to do is we essentially want a cost per liter. Now this has come up as 0. And the reason why, I can save this, is that when we set up the inspection service, we didn't put in any prices. So let's go back to the list and fix that now. If we go look at our inspection service, we can go down to the prices, and in the first price tier, let's say that it's 2 Rand per liter of the inspection service. And we're putting that in here now. So this is essentially just going to automatically generate a service cost associated with that production of 1 liter of wine. So I'm going to save that. And if I go back to my wine in progress now, the Merlot, what we can do is we can have a look at that, and we can see that our inspection service now is 2. So when I produce 1 liter of wine, it's going to take 1 gram of the chemicals, it's going to take 2 kilograms of the grapes, and it's going to take a unit of inspection service at 2 Rand. So where does that 2 Rand go? Well, what will happen is that a journal will be created as it essentially capitalizes this value of the 1 liter of wine. It's going to take the value from the chemicals, the value from the grapes, and it's going to create this additional value, which is the analysis service. What that'll do is that'll capitalize that analysis service cost into inventory, and the opposite side of the journal is going to flow down. It's going to flow down to this expense account of analysis services to be capitalized. And that means when I actually get that invoice from the supplier, I will book that purchase invoice of those services against that account. And what I would expect is that the invoice from the supplier says 2,000 Rand. I've manufactured 1,000 liters of wine with a predefined cost of 2 Rand, and those two will essentially net off. My expense is capitalized into my inventory. If you have any differences in that cost, you can override it at the actual assembly stage, so that if the analysis service is going to cost you a slightly different amount, you can do that straight away. If you don't pick that up, then remember that your to be capitalized account will have a balance left over, because the combination of the purchase invoice from the supplier will be one value, and the value that you capitalize based on this bill of materials will be another. And essentially the to be capitalized account should be flat, and you can investigate and resolve that. So that essentially finishes off a slightly more complex bill of materials. We've got stock items in here. We've essentially got an overhead or a service component in there, and we will save that now. We will follow a very similar process for the other liters of wine that we're going to create, and we'll put in there one for a Shiraz, and we'll put in one for a Merlot Shiraz blend, and then essentially we can start to look at how we do the purchasing and assembly steps of the wine process in Deer. Quick recap. We've got essentially our stock items in here, which are barrels, chemicals, corks, bottles, and we've got the grapes, we've got some services, and we've got our stock items. We've got the Merlot, we've got the Shiraz, and then we've got the Merlot Shiraz blend. Now, quick little extra point, when I created the Merlot Shiraz blend, exactly the same as the other wine in progress, but what I did is that for the bill of materials, I didn't specify the grapes and the chemicals and the analysis service. What I did is I gave it ratios of the other wines that we'd already created. So I said that it takes 0.7 liters of Merlot and 0.3 liters of Shiraz to produce 1 liter of our blend. Again, I've made that ratio up. Whatever the winemaker essentially has dictated, that would be the standard bill of materials. Now, once more to emphasize, you can override those ratios when you're doing the assembly. So if you've brought some Merlot wine and you've brought some Shiraz wine together, you can specify exactly the blend that is required to create 1 liter of this Merlot Shiraz blend. And with that, we're back to our products list and ready to start doing purchases and assemblies.